Hey everyone, welcome to WittCode, where in this video we're going to learn everything about cross-origin resource sharing, or CORS, and fix the blocked by CORS policy error. Specifically, we will learn about the HTTP headers involved with CORS and how to create a CORS proxy. And I also want to mention that all the code that I write in this video, as well as a blog format, will be available on my website in the link in the description. So before we begin, what is CORS? Well, CORS, or cross-origin resource sharing, is a mechanism enforced by the browser that uses origins to determine if a website at one origin can request data from a website at a different origin. So, before we go any further, let's define what an origin is. An origin is a combination of the protocol, domain, and port of the URL used to access it. Two entities have the same origin only when the protocol, domain, and port number match. Websites with the same origin are allowed to get data from themselves as they have the same origin. This is a policy also enforced by the browser that is known as the same origin policy. If an origin is requesting data from a different origin, then this is known as a cross-origin request, and the CORS policy manages cross-origin requests to mitigate their risks. For example, WittCode.com can't just blindly make requests to WittCodeTools.com without passing some security measures. Or even worse, imagine if random sites on the internet could make requests to our bank account. If one origin is making a request to a different origin, such as with an XML HTTP request or using the Fetch API, it could possibly be restricted or denied by CORS. But so, how does CORS determine if a cross-origin request is allowed? Well, the answer is HTTP headers. CORS is an HTTP header-based mechanism, meaning it is implemented through the use of HTTP headers. Two important headers for CORS are origin and access control allow origin. So the origin header is a request header that indicates the origin that caused the request. For example, if WittCode.com is requesting data from a server, the origin, which would be https wittcode.com on port 8080, will be included in the request. And now, the access control allow origin header is a response header indicating whether the response can be shared with the origin requesting the data. In other words, this header determines if a request will be blocked by CORS or not. So let's give an example of these two headers working in tandem. So let's say WittCode.com makes a request to WittCodeTools.com. Well, the request will contain the origin header set as origin and then listing WittCode.com, and if the request is allowed, the server will respond with the access control allow origin header as WittCode.com, specifying that this cross-origin request is allowed. Remember, it's a cross-origin request because the origins of WittCode.com and WittCodeTools.com are different. If the origin specified on the request does not match the origin specified on the access control allow origin header on the response, then the request is blocked by the CORS policy. So as we usually do in this channel, let's have a programming example to better understand this CORS error. What we're going to do is actually create a CORS error ourselves. And the way I'm going to do this is we're going to create this, but let me demo it to you real quick. What we have is a client at origin A and a server at origin B. And we're going to run our origin B server. It's listening on port 1234, while origin A is on port 5050. So it's a different origin, so it's a cross-origin request. But let's run this with live server, which makes it act on port 5050. And now let's see what happens if we run this. Let's open up a console and we'll look for this error. So when we send a request, we can see it has been blocked by the CORS policy. There's no access control allow origin header, which basically means the server isn't allowing this origin here to make requests to it. So we're going to build this, and then we're also going to fix it. But so to get started, let's clear this console here. And let's also close this down because we're going to be working in a new folder here. And to get started, let's create a file called origina.html. And then let's just place some boilerplate code inside by using a shortcut, which is an exclamation mark. And now let's create a button to send a cross-origin request. We'll give it an onClick attribute that will execute a function that sends a cross-origin request. So now let's create this send request function, and we will create this function inside script tags. And now let's set up the request that will be sent to localhost 1234. So to do this, what we first do is create an XML HTTP request object. Then we specify that it will be a GET request that should be sent to localhost 1234 with the protocol as HTTP by using this method open. And finally, we send the request by using the send method. And now, when we click our button, the request will be sent. However, we haven't set up our server to handle this request yet. So to begin, let's create a file called originb.js and import the node HTTP library and the port that the server will listen on. And remember, this port will have to be different than the one our client is on, as we want this to be a cross-origin request. But so the node HTTP library is a core node module that supports many features of the HTTP protocol. And let's now use it to create an HTTP server. So the createServer method creates an HTTP server. And this method takes a function known as a request listener. So this function right here. And this function handles requests from the client as well as the response sent back to the client. If we receive a request, let's send back the message, hi. So this write method sends a chunk of data to the client, and the end method signals to the server that all of the response headers and body have been sent. And as such, the server should consider the response complete. And now, let's just have our server listen for incoming requests on the provided port. This listen method here makes the HTTP server start listening for connections on the specified port. So now all we need to do is run our server and client. So let's run our server, and then let's run our client. And hopefully we get the same result. There we go. So you can see we're getting this CORS error. And so we've created this CORS error now, but how do we actually fix it? Well, a CORS error being fixed relies on the server because the server is responsible for reporting the allowed origins. If we control the server, we simply need to respond with the proper header. If we don't control the server, it's a little trickier, but it can be done using a proxy. So in this first instance, we control the server because we have it right here and we can change the code. So to fix a CORS error on a server we control, we simply need to add the specified origin to the access control allow origin header. For example, we just need to send back a header on the response allowing localhost 5050. And after we do this, our program should work fine. So to allow cross-origin requests on our server, let's add the correct header. Actually, instead of localhost, I'm going to use 127.0.0.1, which is essentially the same thing, except I had some weird issues sometimes using just localhost, so I'd recommend using this instead. But anyway, the setHeader method here sets a single header value on the response that is returned to the client. And this tells our server to allow requests from the origin HTTP 127.0.0.1 on port 5050. And this tells our server to allow requests from the origin HTTP 127.0.0.1 on port 5050, the URL of our client sending the request. And now, let's add some code to our client to handle this response. First, let's create a h1 tag to display the message to the server. And now, inside our script tag, let's get this element by its ID. And now let's handle the response from the server using our XML HTTP request object. So this code sets a listener on our XML HTTP request object that is called whenever the ready state property of the request changes. And the ready state property is a number 0 through 4 that represents the status of the XML HTTP request. And when the ready state is 4, so when we check for its 4 here, this means that the request finished and the response is ready to be read. And the response is present in the response text property of the XHR. So all we need to do is set the inner text of our h1 element to this response text, which of course will be that message, hi. So let's save this. Let's rerun our server. And let's try sending a request again. And so we can actually see that we still have this error here. And the reason for this is because I already have a live server running here, which must be using port 5050, while this one has been assigned to port 5500. So this is 5500. Let's change our server here to allow origin 5500. And now if I send the request, oh, and we still have to change or restart the server. So let's restart this and let's run it again. And now we get high. So we're not getting any more CORS errors. What instead we're getting back is the response. But now let's talk about fixing a CORS error when we don't control the server. So fixing a CORS error on a server we don't control is not as simple as setting the response header on the response. Instead, we have to create a CORS proxy. And a CORS proxy is a proxy that allows us to bypass CORS security restrictions with a small change to the request URL. So in our previous programming example, our client was sending a request to the target server directly. However, with a CORS proxy, the browser sends the request to a CORS proxy, which then forwards the request to the real server. And the CORS proxy then returns the response with the access control allow origin header set. So the CORS proxy acts as a proxy because it is an intermediary between the client requesting the resource and the server providing the resource. And a CORS proxy works because CORS is enforced by the browser, and a CORS proxy is a proxy and not a browser. And as such, there is no CORS policy blocking it from sending the request to a different origin. So let's create a simple CORS proxy now. And so what we're going to be doing is making this CORS proxy work with our origin B server. So first, let's go back in here and let's remove this set header method so that we get blocked by CORS again. And then let's create a file called corsproxy.js and import the HTTP module. And then let's create an HTTP server the way we did previously. Note though that we named the request and response proxy request and proxy response as this application is our proxy. And now let's use the HTTP module to send a GET request to the origin B server, which is listening on port 1234 right here. So the HTTP module GET method sends an HTTP request or HTTP GET request to the provided URL, so this URL here. And it also accepts a callback function that accepts the response from the GET request. And now let's use some events present on this response object to work with the data. So this response object present in the GET method callback extends the event emitter class, and as such we can use this on method, and the on method adds a listener to the provided object listening for the provided event. And when the event is fired, the callback function or listener is called with the provided data. And the events we are listening for here are data, end, and error. This data event is emitted when a chunk of data is available. The end event is emitted when there is no more data to be consumed, and the error event is emitted when an error occurs. And now let's respond to each of these events. But so essentially, when a chunk of data is retrieved, we want to append it to a variable called raw data that is keeping track of the overall data. And because the data here will be sent in chunks. And next, when the end event is emitted right here, we want to set the access control allow origin header on our proxy response so the client doesn't get blocked by CORS. And we then write the data back to the client and call the end method to signal to the server that all of the response headers and body have been sent. And finally, if an error occurs, we just want to log it to the console. And now we just need to change the URL in our client to request to send a request to our CORS proxy instead of this origin here. So instead of sending to 1234, we want to send it to 1235. So then we'll do server.listen. And then let's go into our client and change this to localhost 1235. And now let's duplicate this here. So we have two of these, and we need to rerun origin B. And then let's also run our CORS proxy. And now if we go here, refresh this, let's send a request, and we get high. So once again, we're not blocked by CORS. But if we sent it directly to B instead, refresh this, sent it, then we get blocked. But instead, we're going to work around this by sending a request to our proxy here, which then sends a request to the actual origin B server, and then sets the header so we can actually access it, and then it writes the data to us. So it's a pretty nifty little trick. So then if we go back in here, send the request, we get the data. Now, real quick, I just want to talk about CORS proxy and security. So it is great that we can use a CORS proxy to get around being blocked by CORS. However, CORS proxy should be used carefully, and it is recommended to not use other people's CORS proxies, as they can read and do anything with the full request and response. Like right here, when we get this request, we're sending it to this here, but someone could tell you, hey, my CORS proxy sends it to the thing you think it does, when really it could send it to some website that contains maybe your banking info, and there could be some cookie set, and they could get your bank information or something like that. So they can do malicious things, or whatever they want with the request and the response. So personally, I would only use proxies that are trusted, and in other words, kind of ones just made by you. But so it would be rare for a programmer to never come across a CORS policy issue in their career, but if you do now, hopefully you know what to do. So if this video is helpful, leave a comment, let me know, like, subscribe. But besides that, I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and have a good one.